Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or perhaps it's evening. My name is Herricia Willis. I'm an attorney at law practicing in Grenada for the past 6 years. As a slight background, I'm also an attorney at law in Jamaica and admitted as a solicitor of the Supreme Court of England and Wales in 2000. Well, I'm here today to inform you of wonderful news. I intend to advise and promote law in Grenada because Grenada matters. Today's topic is adverse possession, commonly known as squatters' rights.
Okay, so what would that mean?
Well, basically, adverse possession means someone occupying land belonging to another without their permission. That is very important because this happens very, very often.
So tell us how these situations can come about.
Right, basically, in the Caribbean, there's quite a lot of individuals in the diaspora. They own property in their country. They sometimes leave it with agent or with family. And when this occurs, they're not there, or the individuals who they put in charge are not always there to look after the land. And individuals, they slowly, over time, move on that land. They're there without the owner's permission, but the catch is, if they're there for over 12 years, they can claim the owner's rights over their land. Well, much more than claim, they can actually claim ownership of that land. Well, basically, for that to occur, 3 things must happen, must be in play. That individual must be in possession of that piece or property of land for over 12 years. That's very important, that time frame. Secondly, they must intend to possess the land. They do things on the land to make it look like it's theirs. They intend to have that land. And thirdly, which is most important, they must be in possession of that land or property without the owner's permission.
So could you give an example of misconceptions about this situation?
Misconception. Okay, you have a property and you've just said to somebody, can you look after it for me? There's no written agreement, and this usually happens between family, but not always family. But as I say, there's no written permission. They're there on the land and they're looking after the land. They build a permanent structure. You may have said to them, okay, you can build a wall house so it's removable, but in fact, they build a permanent structure. That permanent structure, they've put that there because it's not there, won't be moved. So they're there on that land with some permanency. They're acquiring the land as their own. Or it could be a simple thing of removing or just moving the boundary lines. You may move, or another individual may move the boundary lines by, say, 1 foot 1 year, 2 foot the other. So they do it slowly. So over time, they could actually acquire quite a large portion of your property, they can actually start growing things on that land. Then hence 12, 14, 15 years later, they decide to survey their land. And hence the land is much larger than it was prior. So that's a gradual way of acquiring someone's property.
What are the most common situations that you've come across or clients come to you about?
Common situation. They have property, land. Normally, there's no structure on the land. You see a lot of that in Grenada. And somebody moves on the land, or it is next door, adjacent to their land, and they use that other person's land as to park their cars as a right of way. So after a while, that right of way becomes an allowed road. So they've acquired or using that road for 12, 14 or more years. They've acquired a right over your property. In fact, they actually take your property away from you.
What about somebody who would come on the land to garden the land, to keep the land clean and keep the land clean, take provision of the land and been doing that for a number of years? Have they got a right if they decide to build something on the land?
That's what happens also, because a lot of land is used, whether it's residential land, they use it as farming. So it's quite normal. So you have a plot of land and then you notice someone's cleaned it up. You may say to them, "What are you doing there?" They say, "Oh, I'm cleaning it for the owner." You don't know if that is true, but they're doing it for 12 years or more, right? Then they try to obtain rights over that property.
What would you advise citizens of Grenada who own property to avoid this?
To avoid this, there's many things you can actually do. Make sure or ensure there's somebody there could actually go to the land and ensure it is in the condition that the owner expects it to be. When I say condition, there's no one is there planting or gardening on the land. No one is there building on the land. Actually make sure no one is there without the permission of the owner.
Legal fees. People will be concerned about legal fees. Is it better to deal? Obviously, it's better to deal with this matter as soon as possible. Should there a problem arise?
Well, the legal fees, of course, will depend on the seniority of the attorney, and of course on the extent of what needs to be done. So it can vary, and it also depends. It does depend on what needs to be done. So I cannot actually give you a specific fee.
In trying to find a good solicitor or attorney at law, what would be the best way to find, or what would be the things we should look out for to find a good solicitor or lawyer?
Best way is word of mouth. If you know somebody who's used a lawyer and they've got good service, that is a very good way. It is not like, say, America or the UK, where you have a body where you can go to and request assistance. It's unfortunate, but it's many times it's trial and error. In Grenada, there's over 100 lawyers, and they are not all bad.
So how would one discern if I didn't have word of mouth or didn't know anybody?
Well, they're watching my show. I deal with a lot of applications and defending adverse possession claims. As I say, it is very common in Grenada. Moving of boundaries, possessing others' property, very, very common in the Caribbean.
What are a owner's rights?
Well, you are the paper owner. Well, the reason why I'm saying paper owner, in Grenada, we do not have a registered land system. That is where everything, ownership, is on the computer. Everything is still done the old-fashioned way by documents. These documents are held in the court registry. Unfortunately, some of them have deteriorated a lot, but that is where all those documents are kept.
Would you suggest getting those documents updated?
Yes, there's always been petitions by the lawyers requesting that an update of system be done, but I must admit it is not in a good situation. There are documents that goes back over 100 years. Most of them are handwritten and very faded. A lot of them was lost in Ivan in 2004. So a lot of the time, the lawyers are relying on individuals having a copy of their documents because it's documents pre-2000, always problems to actually locate these documents.
What's the biggest mistakes owners make?
Biggest mistake. It's usually leaving untrustworthy individuals with your property to care for. It's unfortunate that many times these untrustworthy individuals are family members. So you must really put things into place to ensure your property is protected. Of course, a lot of property is just left there wild. So make sure it is cleaned, the land is cleaned and kept well kept. So everybody knows that the owner is looking after that property. He knows his rights. That is the best way. Right, to prevent adverse possession. One, what you could do is put a no trespassing sign up. You could block the entrance with gates. This is a good way to deter trespassers, but the fact that you have signs or gates won't protect you against a claim. But it shows that it's a deterrent, right? Second, you can only claim adverse possession without the owner's permission. So if you know somebody's there, somebody is on your land, give them permission. You give them written permission, not just go and tell them over the telephone, write it down. For example, if you give them permission to park on the property, but you ensure this permission does not go on forever, because that way they can have a right of way. That's another topic. You could offer to rent the property to a trespasser, because if they're renting it, they're paying money. That means they're there with your permission. And of course, you do have an option of hiring a lawyer. Because of course, you may need, or you will need, to take that trespasser to court if need be. Or you may actually want a court to remove a structure. That is where they've built on your property. But remember, you must always remember the time limit, 12 years. So if an individual is on the land for 12 years without your permission, but they're doing everything to that land as if they're the owner, then that's when the problem comes about. And of course, if you give them permission to be on the land, ensure you do not give them a right to build a concrete structure. Because a concrete structure is something with permanency. So you would be giving them the right to stay and live on your property.
Is there anything else?
Basically, again, to the time limit, the law does not really draw a distinction between the different motives for possessing the land. So basically, to gain title by adverse possession, they must possess that property in such a way to show that they intend to possess it without permission. So their beliefs and intentions of ownership as such is generally irrelevant. It is if they've acquired that property without permission and acting as if they're the owner, that's when the adverse possession claim comes in.
What about government? You hear of stories of government taking people's property.
That is completely different. That's called compulsory purchase. They cannot just possess someone's property like that. If it is needed for the betterment of the public and the country, they are required to compensate the owner. They cannot just evict the owner from their property. They must compensate them. And of course, they cannot just take the property and say, oh, I'm giving it to somebody else. There has to be good reason for that possession. So it's different from adverse, because adverse is where you're using the property against the rights of the paper owner, because it's unregistered land, and the owner would only have paper to show his rights. Of course, adverse possession comes under the Possessory Titles Act. So if an individual has acquired that property for over 12 years, for example, I spoke previously about family land. That is where land is retained in the grandfather, grandmother, great, 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 great grandmother, grandfather's name. It is very difficult to prove ownership through the generations. It is not adverse possession because you know through the lineage where or who the paper owner is. But again, you use the Possessory Titles Act to acquire ownership of the property through the courts. So where an individual has adversely obtained that land, they would go through that same procedure, whereby they are required to advertise their application to acquire that property. I'll just repeat from the last time. So basically, they need to advertise in 2 newspapers, including the Legal Gazette, to advertise of their intent to acquire property. So of course, that would give the true owner the right to come forward to show the court that it is their property and the individual has obtained it against their rights. So basically, the paper owner of the land, they do have another chance, another opportunity to go to the court and say, no, this individual should not acquire my property in the way they do. Because also the adverse possessor, if they're using, and again, here now in Grenada, that's the only way they could acquire the property. So if no one has come forward to contest that adverse possessor's legal rights now, because they're coming to the courts, they can acquire it that way. And I must say, presently, there are quite a lot of these actions before the court because of lots of property is still in a deceased descendant's name. So there's that way of acquiring the legal owner, because of course the legal owner has been dead for many years. And if the actual name is not known, of course, or they could not come under their estate, the adverse possessor is able to acquire the property that way. So I hope I've been able to answer all your questions, but I'm sure if you leave your comments, I can able to answer them or address them for you in the next show.
Miss Willis, once again, thank you very much.